Alright, welcome to the channel, and today we'll be talking about the Nitsch Sound DSHA-3FN, which is quite a mouthful. But this was sent out by CT, or Christian, who owns Nitsch Sound, and he's not asked me to say or do anything regarding this amp, but I also wanted to touch, before diving into this video, a little bit more kind of what he's doing, and I'm really stoked what he's kind of trying to do and what he is doing, and that's bring older, amps or audio gear that either are, no longer being built, or they were prototypes, and then he gets permission from the original creators to then recreate them and put them out into the public, or get it out to the public and the general audiophile world. And so he's already done the SCHIIT shit piety, which is his piety, or Nitsch piety, but it was a SCHIIT product originally. It's a Magni, and I have one stowed away right now, but it's basically a small little Magni amp, and it has like this really wonderful kind of warmth to it. It's, and I'd say, almost tube-like, and that's the piety. And then so that was his first product, and he put that out for about $100, and I think he's making more, so there'll be more on his website soon, and I'll link his website below. And then his second product is this beautiful amp behind me, which is kind of hard to see, but I'll roll B-roll and all that fun stuff so you guys can see it. But it's gorgeous, and this is the DSHA-3FN, and I think the N stands for Nitsch. And this one is a very popular and hard to find amp that there really wasn't that many of them out there. I think a lot of them were like the Ravenswood is what they're called, and some other wood materials. And the unique part of what CT did was he has a really unique way that it sits on the desk. It has a unique feet for the amp, and then also the gold knob, and has gold accents, and then the wood along the sides is this really cool checkerboard, but it's three-dimensional, and has elevation differences between the different squares on the side there, and it's fantastic looking. So that's kind of the history, or kind of not history, but the story behind Nitsch Sound to some level. There's a lot more to it, and I'm hoping to have Christian on at a later time. Anyways, let's dive right into the next part, which will be build, aesthetics, and all that fun stuff, followed by sound, and then I'll wrap it up. So it's a beautiful amp. It has really nice colorway to it. Polish on it is really well done. I'd say he has on the wood sides there with that checkerboard three-dimensional type of deal. One of the things I noticed is that because it is hand done, that there could be variances. Each one will have its own unique side wood pieces, because that's the nature of wood, so take that into account. But as far as I've seen, it's a beautiful set, and the way the volume pot works, it's fantastic. It has a nice, smooth, easy to turn, and it's actually inset inside of the case, like, so it doesn't sit on the outside of the part. It actually is not flush to the outside of the case. It actually sits inside of it a little bit, so it's actually a little bit inside of the case for the volume pot, which I think is actually excellent, and it looks really nice and really clean looking. And then the vents on the side, I like how it's offset, and it looks really nice, and you can see kind of inside the circuit board a little bit there with the lights and everything. I will say, Christian, if you're listening, can we do purple LEDs next time? But that aside, overall it's a nice solid little amp. It's not too big. It fits most, it's about the same size as my TT2 here, and it's a little bit taller, but otherwise it's about the same footprint as far as like space on the desk. And aesthetically, like I said, gorgeous. Really looks fantastic in my opinion, and build is solid. Like, I don't see any problems with the build or aesthetic with this. It's a fantastic built and looking amplifier. All right, so next up we have sound, and I wrote a bunch of notes for this, and I compared a bunch of headphones, and I also went between a couple of different like amp comparisons as well. So let's dive right into like a quick amp DAC, what I used it with the most type of deal. I paired it with the FIO R7, which is that kind of standalone all-in-one streamer deal, and that was more just kind of see how it compared to like that onboard DAC being the DAC, and then its onboard amp compared to it as an amp. And it's not a fair comparison. It's a like $800 all-in-one versus a $2,000 plus amp. But that being said, the things I noticed the most difference between the R7 amp and the lovely DSHA-3FN amp was that the 3FN had just exponentially more detail, separation, depth, width. It kind of just, everything was just better across the board. Like, it's especially going back and forth. My other pairing I used it with was my lovely Hollow Audio Spring DAC, and that one I used for a little bit, but it was so massive on my desk, I ended up putting it back with my big speakers downstairs. And so I went back over to this setup as my main setup, which was with my Cord TT2. And that one's a little bit harder to do like an amp comparison, because when you switch over to the Cord TT2, I had to switch over to a single-ended from a balanced cable. The TT2 has to go into amp mode, which takes a few seconds for it to like kind of charge that up or switch to that mode. And when you do that, it's not as easy to do a one-to-one back and forth. Like I said, it is actually fairly similar to the Cord TT2's amp, but I feel like the 3FN, the DSHA amp, has just a tad more, a little bit more like detail, maybe, or a little separation. It feels like just a slight bit, but it's kind of hard to pick apart and kind of find. And it also felt like there's a little bit more brightness to the 3FN depending on the headphones used. It felt like there's a little more high-end energy, and it did feel a little bit more separation in the details, if that makes sense. Like between the notes and like just things, like they weren't so close together. Like, so if you heard like two notes from a piano, they were a little better separated, or a guitar, that kind of thing. It just felt like I could pick them apart just a little bit easier, but it was marginal. But that's my main pairing I used as a DAC amp, though, was with the TT2 as the DAC, and then the DSHA-3FN as my amp out. And some of the tracks that I listened to, and I'll link them below, is the first one was Jericho by Aniko. That one's a fun track. There's this rain in the beginning in the background, and this kind of goes through all the tracks, but the notes that I picked up for all of these tracks, actually, that kind of was consistent throughout these, and there's 4 tracks that I'm listing, or going to list down below, was that there was this really nice low-end dynamics, and the background. Like, the background detail just sounded good. Like, it sounded like there was a depth to it. There was this nice kind of overall background signature. Like, I can pick up the background. It felt like it was properly separated from the instruments and the vocals. And the other thing I noticed was that the details are really fantastic with this amp, and as well as the fact that the separation details, those kind of things, were really excellent. The staging was, pretty dang good, actually. I really like the staging on it, that it provided the headphones to allow them to breathe their staging kind of thing. Obviously, the headphones are going to factor more into that than the amp, but it kind of accentuated those headphones that have bigger stage. It would kind of help with that. So for the Jericho, just pay attention to the beginning, that rain, and then her vocals are really good, and it has this nice punchy dynamics. And that's the other thing, the dynamics, this kind of helps accentuate with the headphones that I'm using. Next track, and this is Ain't That a Kick in the Head, and this is actually a remix of a Dean Martin track with RJ42 as the remixer. And this one's fun because, Dean Martin, it has like the piano and the jazzy kind of like percussions and the brass and whatnot. And same thing with before, the dynamics and background and the details were really they really just kind of stood out. And this is very, very energetic amp. But that doesn't mean it's like a lean forward kind of listen. It still has this nice kind of like midway between lean forward listen and like a lean back and relax. It kind of it flirts. It's like a happy medium between a lean forward listen and a lean back kind of listen. So next track was Nice Things by Tank and the Bangas. And this one's interesting. It's a new track I just found recently, and a new band I found recently. And this one, she just has a unique voice. It's a fun track. It's a very pop, hip-hop, R&B type kind of deal. Once again, the biggest notes I had to take away was the dynamics, the backgrounds, and the details that I was pulling from it. And then my final track that I was listening to was actually an older track that I used to listen to a lot, and it's an EDM track, and this is Love Signs by the Jungle Giants. And once again, the same kind of notes are dynamics, backgrounds, details. Forward and full is what I kind of got with these. And those are the kind of tracks, like the notes for the tracks anyways. But going back to the amp itself, is that it's mildly warm, it's very dynamic, detailed, has really good separation, leans a tad bright in the highs. And overall though, it's actually one of my favorite amps I've listened to in a while, to be honest. Probably makes sense because my favorite amp currently is my ECP-T4, which is, I like to call it the tube version of this amp. The DSHA-3FN complements that one pretty well. This amp needs about 30 to 45 minutes to hit that warm-up sweet spot. Prior to that, I noticed it did lean more bright. It had a little more, not sibilant, but it would definitely lean brighter. And then once it hit that 30 to 45 minutes, maybe it's brain burn in, or the actual, like, it warmed up and it's, you know, flowing, all electrons are flowing properly through the amp or whatever. I'm no electrical engineer. I'm no, it's like whatever. It, at that point though, it did feel that, like, I was hearing it kind of come into its own, and it kind of, everything, like the highs smoothed out and it got a little more thumpy. It felt a little more like it hit the ground running right around that point in the warm-up. Finally, I did want to do a quick rapid fire on all the headphones I use. So this is going to be a little bit unique because I have them all on the floor in front of me and I have a bunch of them. So we'll start with my first headphone here that I actually did a video on recently. I'm actually getting ready to send this out here in the near future, and that's the Mez Lyric. And I felt this one did pretty good actually as a planar. It's already kind of a fun sounding headphone. It has pretty decent details, but it's more of that fun signature and kind of do-all, catch-all kind of sound signature, kind of easy listening. And it honestly, it did great with this. It wasn't, I didn't think it was exceptional or anything like that, but it did really good. I thought this was a good pairing as far as the Lyric with the DSHA-3FN. Next up, and I still have the cables attached because if you have ever put the cables on a HD800, it's a pain in the butt. But this is my Franken HD800, so it's got ZMF pad up top, some Deconi pads here. I'm actually getting ready to swap these out with some Yaxi pad, and I'm going to do a video on that later. But my Franken HD800, shockingly, this did really good. I was actually really impressed with it. The only thing I noticed was that its stage and the imaging was fantastic, as is with the HD800, but the highs were a tad bit too bright for my liking, and also that the lows are like HD800, so the lows weren't the greatest. They were dynamic, but they're kind of not the best. So HD800 was okay in my opinion with this. So moving on, next one, my lovely favorite, but these are the Rad Zeros, and honestly this was a fantastic pairing. This was like peanut butter and jelly. It worked really well. I really loved the signature that this presented. They complemented each other very well and highlighted what does well, and it gave a lot of good detail, really good slam, good dynamics. The staging kind of opened up a little bit for the Rad Zeros. Detail was great, and imaging and what have you, and I really liked this pairing. The Rad Zeros with the DSHA was one of my tops. One of the better pairings, if not the best pairing, is the focals, because the history behind this amp is that it was originally, I believe, designed for focals, and specifically like utopias and that kind of thing. So the only focal I have is the lovely Stelia, and this was great. This actually was a fantastic compliment. The only thing I would say that I would have liked more of would be the low end, like punch and dynamic. Like a little, there's dynamics were there, but like the punch and like thumpiness wasn't quite where I'd want it to be for the performance of the rest of the headphone. But overall, like this was a fantastic pairing, and then it did excellent. It was another top-notch one as far as the focal Stelia. Then we jump into. So I have my lovely atriums here, and this pairing was good. It had a decent dynamics, but it did lean a little too bright. Like I felt like this wasn't the best pairing with the ZMFs as far as ZMFs and the DSHA. This, for whatever reason, it was just a tad bit, I mean, it was fine, but it did lean a little bit too bright for my personal, like, if I was going to listen for a long period of time, it did lean a tad bit too bright for me personally. As far as the atrium opens, lovely atrium closed, and this actually paired fantastic. This was actually another one of my favorite pairings. It was still a tad bright, but it wasn't as bright as the atrium opens, and it actually was one of my favorite pairings. This was really good, really enjoyed it. Had way better low end than the atrium opens, and this was a fun pairing. I actually enjoyed this one. It wasn't my favorite of the ZMFs with this, but we'll get to that in a second. But this was definitely a good pairing, the atrium closed with the DSHA-3FN. Let's jump into the Verite Opens. Verite Opens. This was also not my favorite pairing. This was a little bit too bright, kind of similar to the Atrium Opens. Very similar. It had a little bit more dynamics, a little more speed, a little more punch, more detail, and the imaging and separation was a little bit better. It felt like, or just maybe it was just the speed of it. It just felt like it was faster. It could keep up with the tracks a little bit more, and the dynamics seemed to be a little bit more punchy. But overall, this one also leaned a little bit too bright for my personal preference. But it was fine. It was it sounded okay. It sounded good, but it wasn't my favorite pairing of the ZMFs. The Verite Closed. Fantastic. This was punchy, dynamic. The lows weren't too bright. It definitely got a little bit energetic, but it was never bad. They complemented each other fantastically. This was fun, very thumpy. The mids were good. It's a VC, so if you don't know, there is a little bit of the mids are somewhat kind of pulled down, but with this pairing, the mids kind of got pushed up a little bit. There's a little more warmth there, and the lows were it's weird, like the lows actually they're energetic, but they weren't as bright, I guess. And so, fantastic pairing. This was one of my favorites. Really enjoyed this pairing. It was really, really good. Also, probably one of my favorite pairings was my ZMF Aeolus. And this is the one I have with I call it my cushy boy because it's got all the suede pads on everything. This was basically the VC signature, but a little bit less detail, a little bit less speed, a little bit less dynamics, but the punch and the thump was there, and the overall signature was very similar to the VC. This was a fun listen. This is on par with like the Rad Zeros, being like kind of like the top notch. My top two favorites would probably be the Rad Zeros and the Aeolus, followed by probably the VC, and then the Stelia would be my top listening headphones for this. So that's the headphones. Final thoughts, probably one of my top amps I've listened to in the past couple years, honestly. Like it's gorgeous, it looks beautiful. Pros and cons kind of deal. I don't really have too many cons. There is one con though. Maybe I'll cover it with the B-roll, but when you touch the side here on the front, looking at it front left, because of the way he has the feet for the amp, if you're not careful, and you shouldn't probably ever touch this anyways once it's set up, but it is easy to push it down. Unless you hit that very specific spot, there's no problem. It's very stable. I think other cons, nothing I can really think of off the top of my head, other than the fact that it does need that 30 to 45 minute kind of warm up to hit its stride, and then also that it can lean a little bit bright depending on the headphones you're using and what have you. That's kind of it. I mean, most of this was just really fantastic and enjoyable listen with this headphone amplifier. Yeah, easy recommendation from me. I love the colorway, I love the aesthetics, I love the sound that it produces, especially with the headphones I was mentioning as like the top tier ones. And yeah, I lost a lot of time listening with this amplifier and this selection of headphones. So thanks again for Nitsch Sound for sending this out and letting me demo it for a long time. And CT, awesome dude. Definitely, if you ever go to a show and CT's there, take the time to talk to the dude because he is easy to talk to, very fun, very engaging, and highly recommend getting to know him because he's an awesome guy. So anyways, DSHA-3FN, easy recommendation, and that kind of wraps it up, I guess. So I guess we'll see everybody on the next one. All right, cheers.